The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee, the kind of place that reminded Emma how out of place she often felt in the world of sleek professionals. She sat quietly in one of the leather chairs, smoothing out the wrinkles of her modest dress while her 5-year-old son, Noah, swung his little legs back and forth beside her. She had woken him up early, fed him a quick breakfast of toast and fruit, and whispered encouragements to herself in the bathroom mirror before rushing out the door. This job interview was more than just a chance at employment, it was her lifeline. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings were already dwindling. Without this opportunity, she wasn't sure what tomorrow would look like. Around her, candidates sat stiffly, rehearsing their answers, their expensive portfolios tucked neatly into briefcases. Emma clutched her plain manila folder, inside which lay a carefully typed resume that she had revised again and again. She noticed how the others avoided her gaze, their eyes flickering instead to Noah, who sat with a picture book balanced on his lap. His little fingers traced the illustrations while occasionally leaning into her arm for comfort. Emma stroked his hair gently, praying he wouldn't become restless. She had no one to leave him with. Her mother worked long shifts, and her few friends had their own lives to manage. This interview was too important to miss, even if it meant bringing Noah along. The whispers began almost immediately. A man in a sharp gray suit leaned toward the woman beside him and murmured, "Unprofessional. Can you believe she brought a child here?" The woman gave a small, disdainful laugh, tilting her chin high as if the sight of Emma somehow lowered the value of the entire interview process. Another candidate, a young man with slicked back hair, rolled his eyes and muttered just loud enough for Emma to hear, "This isn't a daycare." Their words stung, sharp and cutting, though Emma tried to keep her expression calm. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the floor tiles, as heat crept up the back of her neck. Her heart raced, not from their judgment alone, but from the fear that they might be right. What if the panel saw her as irresponsible? What if they dismissed her before she even had the chance to speak? She had spent nights preparing answers, researching the company's mission, and practicing her tone so she could come across as confident. But now, under the weight of so many judging eyes, her confidence cracked like fragile glass. Noah, sensing her unease, tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, are you okay?" His voice was soft, innocent, unaware of the tension that surrounded them. Emma forced a smile, blinking away the sting of tears. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just remember, we're a team. Always." She kissed his forehead and tried to let that reminder settle her nerves. Still, the murmurs continued. One of the receptionists glanced at Noah and frowned, as if the sight of a child in this pristine environment was a disturbance to order. Emma sat up straighter, clutching her folder tightly, and whispered to herself, "I belong here. I deserve this chance." Yet a part of her couldn't help but wonder if everyone else in the room had already decided her fate before she ever stepped inside. When the receptionist finally called her name, Emma's stomach dropped. This was it, the moment that could change everything. With her hand firmly around Noah's, she rose to her feet, ignoring the raised eyebrows and quiet chuckles around her. No matter what they thought, she was here. And she was going to fight for this opportunity, for herself and for the little boy whose small hand reminded her of the reason she could never give up. The interview room was nothing like the warm, softly lit lobby. It was colder, sharper, every detail calculated to intimidate. A long glass table stretched across the room, and behind it sat 4 executives in suits that looked as if they had been tailored that very morning. Their faces carried no warmth, only expectation and judgment. Emma held Noah's hand tightly as they stepped inside. She felt his small fingers squeeze hers, a silent plea for reassurance, and she gave him the most confident smile she could manage even though her knees were trembling. "Miss Emma Collins," one of the men said, his voice clipped and formal, glancing at the resume she had submitted. "Please, have a seat." His eyes flicked to Noah, then back to her, and she caught the faint arch of his brow. Already, she could sense the unspoken disapproval. Emma sat carefully, setting her folder on her lap. Noah climbed into the chair beside her, placing his picture book on the table as though he belonged there too. Emma's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. She hoped, desperately, that her preparation, her research, her determination, would be enough to outweigh this awkward start. The woman at the end of the table leaned forward, folding her manicured hands together. "Miss Collins," she began, her tone smooth but tinged with steel, "we appreciate your interest in the position. However, I must ask, why did you think it appropriate to bring your child with you today?" Emma's stomach twisted. She had anticipated tough questions about her work experience, her problem-solving skills, maybe even about the gap in her employment history. But this was different. It was personal. I didn't have anyone to leave him with," she admitted softly. "But I promise it won't affect my ability to perform. I work hard. I always have." One of the older men shook his head, jotting something on his notepad. "Professionalism is about preparation. If you can't even arrange childcare for an interview, how can we expect you to manage the demands of a full-time role here?" His tone was dismissive, as though her presence was already a waste of their time. Noah, sensing the tension, pressed himself against Emma's arm. "Mommy, can we go home?" he whispered. His voice was small, uncertain. Emma's heart cracked at the sound, but she brushed his hair back and whispered, "Just a little longer, sweetheart." Gathering her courage, she looked the panel in the eye. "I understand how this looks," she said, her voice trembling but steadying as she continued. "But my circumstances don't define my capabilities. I've worked night shifts, balanced multiple jobs, and still managed to give my son the care he needs. I'm not asking for special treatment, I'm asking for the chance to prove myself." Her words hung in the air for a moment, but instead of recognition, she saw only skepticism. The woman pursed her lips, the man with the notepad tapped his pen impatiently, and another executive leaned back in his chair as if already bored. The silence was suffocating. Finally, the older man spoke again, his tone final and cool. "Miss Collins, this is a competitive environment. We need individuals who can commit fully. I'm afraid bringing your child here today demonstrates a lack of judgment. We'll take your candidacy under review." Emma heard the words for what they truly were, a dismissal. Her heart dropped into her stomach, and she felt the sting of humiliation pressing hot tears to her eyes. She had worked so hard just to be here, and it seemed as though all her effort was unraveling because of one unavoidable truth: she was a mother. She wanted to scream, to beg them to look past the surface, to see her for her skills and determination. But all she could do was sit there, holding Noah's hand as his wide eyes looked up at her with quiet trust. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for him, too. And though the panel couldn't see it, she knew she had more strength in her heart than any of their polished suits could ever carry. The tension in the room thickened as Emma lowered her gaze to the glass table, her fingers trembling around the manila folder on her lap. She could feel the rejection before the words were even spoken, the unspoken verdict heavy in the air. Noah shifted beside her, swinging his little legs nervously, his picture book forgotten. One of the executives cleared his throat, preparing to dismiss her, when suddenly, the door opened with a quiet but commanding click. All heads turned. A tall man in a tailored navy suit entered the room, his presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. His steps were steady, confident, the kind of walk that came from years of authority. He didn't look like the others, his demeanor carried power, but also something more human, more grounded. Emma recognized him immediately from the company's website: Richard Harrison, the self-made millionaire CEO. Her breath caught in her throat. "Good morning," Harrison said, his voice deep and resonant. "I thought I'd sit in on today's interviews." His eyes swept across the room before landing squarely on Emma and the small boy at her side. His brow furrowed slightly, not in disapproval, but in curiosity. "What's going on here?" The lead interviewer cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. "Mr. Harrison, we were in the middle of reviewing Miss Collins' candidacy. Unfortunately, she brought her child to the interview, which we've explained as highly inappropriate." His words were carefully chosen, but the underlying judgment was sharp. Emma's cheeks burned. She braced herself for the final blow, expecting the CEO to agree, to confirm what everyone else had already decided, that she didn't belong here. But instead, Harrison stepped closer, his sharp eyes softening as he looked down at Noah. The little boy stared back, wide-eyed, clutching the edge of his mother's sleeve. Harrison crouched down, bringing himself to nose level. "Hey there, buddy," he said warmly. "That's a pretty cool book you've got. Do you like superheroes?" Noah blinked, surprised that this important-looking man was speaking to him directly. Slowly, he nodded, a shy smile creeping across his face. "Batman," he whispered. "Batman." Harrison chuckled, his voice rich with genuine amusement. "You know, Batman never had superpowers. Just determination. He reminds me a lot of people I know." He gave Noah a wink before standing, turning his gaze back to Emma. Emma's throat tightened as Harrison studied her. His look wasn't cold or dismissive like the panels. It was searching, as though he were trying to read something deeper in her eyes. "Tell me," he said, folding his arms, "why do you want this job?" Not the rehearsed answer, the real one. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, she faltered, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness in his tone. But then she found her voice, soft at first but growing steadier. "Because I need it," she admitted. "Not just for me, but for him. I've worked every kind of job I could find, late nights, long hours, but nothing that could give us stability. This company, it's about building solutions, about growth. And that's all I want, for my son to grow up with security, to know that I fought for something better for him." The room fell silent. Even the executives who had seemed so quick to dismiss her now shifted uncomfortably, their pens hovering over their notepads. Harrison's expression softened further. He gave a slow nod, as if her words had struck a chord. Emma held her breath, unsure of what would come next. All she knew was that, for the first time since stepping into that building, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, truly seen, by the one person whose opinion mattered most. The silence stretched in the room after Emma's words, so heavy that even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed louder. Emma could feel her heart thundering against her ribs, each beat echoing the fear that she had revealed too much, that her honesty would be used against her. Noah leaned against her side, tiny fingers still clutching her sleeve. She wanted to shield him, to protect him from the sting of rejection she had grown too accustomed to, but there was no hiding here. Not anymore. Richard Harrison broke the silence first. His voice wasn't sharp like the panels had been, nor was it laced with the quiet judgment she had felt since walking into the room. It was steady, reflective, and surprisingly gentle. "You remind me," he said slowly, "of my own mother." Every eye in the room turned toward him in surprise. Harrison rarely shared personal anecdotes, and the panel looked visibly unsettled. But he went on, his gaze fixed on Emma. "She raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, never complained, even when she was exhausted. People underestimated her constantly, but she was the strongest person I've ever known. She taught me that the hardest challenges forge the sharpest steel." He glanced at Noah, who was now staring at him with wide-eyed curiosity. "I see that same steel in you." Emma's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. She quickly blinked them away, unwilling to break down in front of the very people who had doubted her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with sincerity. The panel shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances, as though the ground beneath them had shifted. The lead interviewer cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, with all respect, we do have a certain standard of professionalism." Harrison raised a hand, cutting him off. His tone was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. "Professionalism is important, yes. But determination, grit, and loyalty, those are priceless. Miss Collins has shown more commitment walking into this room with her son than half the applicants here." His gaze swept the table, daring anyone to challenge him. This company was built on resilience, on giving people a chance when no one else would. "I won't let us forget that." Turning back to Emma, he smiled, warm, genuine, the kind of smile that made her chest ache with relief. "You're hired." The words didn't register at first. Emma blinked, certain she had misheard. But when she looked at Noah, who clapped his little hands together in delight, the truth sank in. Her chest tightened as tears finally slipped free, but this time they weren't tears of shame or despair, they were tears of hope. "Thank you," she managed, her voice breaking. "You don't know what this means to us. Harrison stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Never apologize for being a parent. It's the hardest, most important job there is. If you can handle that, you can handle anything we throw your way. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She rose to her feet, gathering Noah into her arms. The executives still looked stunned, some scribbling furiously in their notes, others staring blankly as though they had witnessed something they couldn't quite process. But Emma didn't care. For once, the room's judgment meant nothing. As she walked toward the door, Noah beamed up at her, his small voice ringing with pride. "Mommy, you got the job." She hugged him tighter, whispering back, "Yes, baby. We did." And for the first time in years, Emma stepped out of a room not carrying the weight of rejection, but the light of possibility, her future, and nose, blazing ahead like a sunrise she had long prayed to see.